Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to welcome you guys to our Sage 100 Account Receivable Tips and Tricks webinar. I am Garen Stout. I'm the Client Success Manager for Oasis Solutions, and this is a recorded webinar, but we will be monitoring the chat box, so feel free to put any questions or things that you need to know in the chat box, and we will address those as we go. We appreciate you guys and hope you all learn a lot from the webinar. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the July 2021 Sage 100 Tips and Tricks. And today we are going to talk about accounts receivable. You should know that this is a pre-recorded session today, but you will have the ability to ask questions and using the Q&A feature. And you can submit those questions and someone will follow up with you after today's presentation. Also, the presentation today is being presented in Sage 100 version 2020. It is not being presented yet in the 2021 version. So let's go ahead and get started. And as with all of our webinars, I usually base this on questions that come into our support team, things that we discover that clients aren't utilizing properly, or features that they may not even know are there. So I want to go through and show you some of those things today, and hopefully it will help you have a better understanding of some of the features within the accounts receivable module. So I'm going to start initially with the setup of AR. So I'm going to go into AR. Let me just kind of close some of these screens. And we're going to go into setup, and we're going to go into the accounts receivable options. And I just kind of want to go through and show you a few things that are listed. So on this main tab, one of the things I just want to briefly talk about is sales tax reporting. And you do have the ability within Sage to set up tax schedules and assign those to your customers to calculate sales tax. If you are doing business nationwide, as you know that there are some states that have a lot of variations with how their taxes are calculated. It could be based upon certain products are at one taxable rate, other products are a different taxable rate. It could be that if you're in Tennessee and you're in one municipality, it is 10%, and if you're in another municipality, it may be 9.5%. So there's a lot of things to keep up with and maintain. If you are struggling with sales tax, or the basic sales tax feature in Sage 100 is just not working for you, please reach out to our team, because we do have tax software, tax service add-ons that are very, very helpful in that situation in calculating the tax, calculating whether there's tax on freight based on the zip code, helping you with your sales tax reporting, and so forth. So if you do have a need for assistance with sales tax, advanced sales tax reporting, please contact Jody Patterson at Jody, Jody, at oasisky.com, and she will be glad to talk with you about options for sales tax reporting. The next thing I'm going to talk about is on the additional tab, and this very first question says open item or balance forward. And if you notice, there's a down arrow, and mine is set to mixed. When you install Sage in the very beginning, it defaults to open item, which is what most everybody wants to do. What this means is that if you do open item and you are sending out statements. You know, open item customers are going to list on an invoice by invoice basis what is due. Each invoice, each balance of each invoice. Balance forward means that it's going to keep your detailed invoice history. Once you do period in processing, it's going to lump all of those invoices together and bring together a balance forward and say your balance forward is $12,014, but it's not going to break it out by invoice by invoice. You know, people used to use balance forward years ago, but I rarely run into anyone that does that type of calculation any longer. And then also you have mixed, which means your customers could be open item or balance forward. So the thing that is important is that if you're accounting, you always want it to be open item, then make sure this is set to open item. Because if you set it to mixed, like my example was, you could accidentally set a customer as balance forward. And once you have changed them to balance forward and it's calculating their balance and their aging in that fashion, you cannot change it to be open item. You literally have to create a new customer and kind of start over. So just double check that and make sure that it is set at the proper setting. And again, I think it should most likely be open item or balance forward, but if you have mixed, you run the risk of somebody setting up the invoice incorrectly. The next thing is the number of months to retain paid invoices, and you can change that up to 9,999 months if you want to, but just think about how long you want to keep that. Obviously, my setting in this demo data was set to 3, and I don't think that's nearly long enough to retain history. I want to retain history for as long as I can, or as long as makes sense and it doesn't, I'm not storing too much data. And then based upon how long you want to retain them, it's going to ask if you want to remove those paid invoices during period end or when you're doing year-end processing in the AR module. If it's period end, once I go through my period end processing, it's going to come out here and look to see how long I want to keep those to keep those paid invoices. And based on this setting, anything that was paid more than 36 months ago, it's going to purge those paid invoices from my history. Now, kind of stepping back, when I went into here initially, it was set to 3 months. If I set this to 3 months and I do period end, it's going to remove any of those paid invoices more than 3 months ago. There's no way to get those back unless you're restoring from a Okay, I would like to apologize for that brief interruption. I did have my audio dropped, so I do apologize for that. So what I was saying is that if this number is set too low and you purge those invoices, they're basically gone. So if you come back in here and go, oh, darn, I wish that would have been 36 months, it's not going to bring those old invoices back. So if your company is not in a habit of doing period end processing on a consistent basis, then before you ever start doing period end processing, look to see how long you're keeping history. History is throughout every setup option screen on all of your modules. And so you have something here on the additional tab. You also have a history tab where there's more information on how long you're keeping your sales history, how long you're keeping your cash receipt history. So all of that goes into play when you are doing that period in processing, and then at the end of your fiscal year doing your year-end processing. So I did want to make you aware of that. And then also on this additional tab, you have your aging categories. And this is a kind of a user-defined area. And when you install Sage, it sets it up as to the categories of 30, 60, 90, and 120 days. But if your terms for everyone is, net due upon receipt, or you have 15-day terms, you can change these so that they print differently on your aging report, and it calculates it in this fashion. So this is available if you use the aging categories as days. You can customize it. It is customized on a company by company basis, not customers, but companies, your various companies that you have set up within your Sage 100. You also have the ability to age by month, but you'll notice if I do that, these fields are grayed out. So it automatically defaults to 1, 2, 3, and 4 months. However, you cannot change that. So again, that's something that you might want to just take a look at, and you may want to modify those aging categories based on how you do business. And the other thing that I wanted to show you is on the printing tab. And this is whether or not you want to print customer statements. So we're going to talk about how to generate customer statements in just a minute. But if you want the ability to do statements, you do have to have this box checked. So that's your first step in being able to generate statements. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to move out of here. And then we are going to actually now talk about statement printing. So I'm going to go to customer maintenance. And I'm just going to grab any customer. And because I am, I've told the system that I want to do customer statements, on the additional tab, you will notice on the right, there is a field that says statement cycle. But you're going to notice that there's not a lookup next to it. So you need to be consistent in what you name the statement cycles. I try to keep it simple, and for a statement cycle that I want to send out statements on a monthly basis, then I give it a cycle of M. If you have some customers that say they want a statement every week, you could make a statement cycle of W. Just something that's easy for you to remember, but you do have to be consistent in what you call it. If you have a customer that you do not want to send a statement to, so let's say that your brother-in-law is a customer, but you never want to send him a statement, then you could just leave that field blank, and that customer will never get a statement when you generate them. The other thing that is related to statement printing is this field on the right that says print dunning message. And basically what that is for is that's where you can predefine messages, and I'm going to show you those in just a minute. But you can predefine those done messages, and that's where you might have it say, if everything is current, thank you for your business. If they have an invoice that's over 30 days old, a message prints on there, you have a past due invoice. If they have an invoice that's, 120 days old based on your aging category, there may be a more stern message that, your account is extremely past due, please give us a call. So you can say whether or not you want it to print a done message. So another example of what that would be, let's say again, our brother-in-law is our customer. We want them to get a statement, but we don't want to print a done message because we don't want it saying, hey, your account is really past due, we're going to turn you over to collections. So you can choose whether or not on a customer by customer basis if you want to print that done message. So if you want to generate customer statements, then as you get new customers and you are setting them up in your Sage database, you should be filling in this information as well. And there's ways, if you're like, well, we've never done this, but we'd like to, but we have 3,000 customers in here, and I don't have time to go into each individual customer and type an M in that field. There are global changes in the utilities where you can have it automatically do that for you. So our support team can show you how to do that to save you some time if you want to start utilizing this feature. So, excuse me. So again, we have our cycle and we have the done message. So at this point, what we would be doing when we're ready to print our statements is we go under Accounts Receivable and we go to Period End and we go to Statement Printing. And I'm just going to grab a statement here. You would have your statement set up. You know that using Crystal Reports, you can modify that statement form. You can drop on your logo. You can drop in a text box that gives your remittance information, the address, anything that you want to add and customize to that statement. I'm just going to grab the first one here. And when you go into the statement printing, you see this message button on the right. This is where the done message is identified. So I'm going to click on that. And you'll need to check this because when you install Sage, unless something is changed, it will automatically populate some verbiage in these areas. So make sure that this is specific to you. So the standard message might just say something like, you know, thank you for your business. Stay healthy. And let's say we don't even need a second message there. We could change that. Then when you print the statements and it's aged those invoices, then anything that's over 30 days, it is going to print this message on your statement. Anything over 60 days. And again, this 30, 60, 90, and 120 is based on how you have your aging category set up in your setup options that we just talked about. So again, these can say whatever you want them to say. And then at this point, any customer that gets a statement and that done message box is checked, then this is what's going to also print on their statement. And you can say that you want to age invoices as of a certain date. You can select statements with a minimum balance. So let's say that you only want to send a statement out if a client has more than a $100 balance. Now, this was probably more applicable before you had the ability to email these statements directly through paperless office in Sage 100. So, because if you have 700 customers, but really only 45 should get a statement, you don't want to print all of those and mail them, and you have the postage and so forth. So you can put a minimum balance in there, but kind of going back to paperless office, you do have the ability to set up to email these directly to your customer. So you don't have to print them, stuff the envelopes, and mail them. You can have them automatically generated through paperless. If that's something that you're not currently doing and you're interested in it, please give our support team a call, and someone will be glad to help you get that set up. You also could just say you want to only do it if they have, you know, any balance, but they're in the fourth category, which is that 120 days per definition. Or you could do the current category, which would include anything. So here is the what you need to do in order to select those statements to print is that you tell it if you want to do a certain statement cycle. So you'll not remember that we had that one called M. So I would do equal to, and see when I click on this, there's not a drop-down box. And again, that's why it's important that you be consistent, that, you know, I don't set up customers for my division and say the cycle is M, and someone else sets up customers for their division and they call that statement cycle 1. You know, Sage isn't going to know, other than you can do multiples in here, but you have to be careful. So I can say M there, and then what it's going to do is it's going to go out and it's going to take a look at any invoices. It's going to age it as of today that has any balance in any category that has that statement cycle equal to M, and then you can then you can print those invoices. I'm sorry, I was thinking of two things at once here. So to go back, we talked about maybe you have somebody that wants it done weekly. So maybe the first week of the month, you always do the monthly and the weekly, so that you could do a range here and do contains. So you could do weekly and monthly, and then that will pull both of those. So you could do that for the first week of the month, and then the second week of the month, you only want to do the weekly one, so you could do then the equal to and do the weekly. So hopefully that makes sense as to how that is done. But there should be no reason why you can't print statements. And, you know, maybe you just want to print statements for a couple of customers, that's fine. If you have customers that you do not want to get statements, then just do not set up a cycle code, and they will never generate a statement. So this, some people say they send an aging report, which is fine, but you can automate it very easily by doing the statement printing. You can tell it whether or not to include credit balances. So some people evidently choose not to show the clients when they have a credit, or credit balance. So meaning that if that customer has a credit balance of $5,000, you may not want to send them a statement that just shows they have that credit on the books. So you have the option to do that. And you also have the option of whether you want to include zero balance invoices on that as well. So hopefully that makes sense. And if you have never generated statements, it's something that you're interested in or you would like to explore, again, reach out to our support team and they will be more than glad to help you with that. Okay, if you have questions about statements or anything that we've talked about, you need clarification, please go ahead and type that in the Q&A and someone will be glad to follow up with you and answer those questions for you. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about, we're going to go back into customer maintenance and we're going to talk about utilizing the memos in Sage 100. Various modules have the ability to add memos, and you can add memos at different levels. For instance, in AR, you can add a memo at the customer level, which is what this little icon is right here. So I'm going to pull up a customer. And notice how this little icon is kind of plain. That kind of is my indication in just looking at this that no memos exist on this customer. If I go to my next customer, see how this is now yellow like a little notepad? This is my indication that there are memos that already exist on this customer. You can do memos at the invoice data entry level. You can have memos on your vendors. There's lots and lots of places when you're doing data entry, you will see this little icon. So what I want to talk to you about today is how these memos might be helpful And a really good example is tracking collections. So I have seen in the past where someone prints an aging report, they take that aging report, print it out, and they start calling past dues. And they write little teeny notes on that aging report, you know, spoke to Sally, she promised the payment next week. And then what you do the following week or 2 weeks later, you print that aging report again, you kind of rewrite all the notes, and then you start making calls if somebody didn't send in the payment and so forth. And that can take a lot of time to manage it that way. So one of the things that I suggest to clients is to manage your collections through the memo field. And I've set something up on this particular customer already just to show you how it can be utilized. So I'm going to click on this memo button, and it's going to show me any memos that have been created for this particular customer, because you may have one memo that talks about collections. You may have another memo that talks about, you know, something to do with their account that's real important. So I'm going to click on this lookup, and they only have one listed. If they had multiple memos, they would all be listed here, and you could pick the one you want. But I had previously created a code called collect, and I gave it a description of collection history. And then this is where I've actually been tracking my calls with this customer. So my example here is that I called this client on January 3rd, and I put my notes in. I didn't get my payment, so I called them again on February 15th. I entered my notes in, still didn't get a payment. I called this person's supervisor. They promised a payment no later than April 15th. And if I still didn't get the payment, or maybe I sent them a collection letter today, I can edit this field. And I could say that I sent a collection letter, and I can even add an attachment. I could attach a copy of that collection letter as well to this memo if I wanted to. But let's say the example here is the last time that I spoke to this client was on March the 15th, and they said they would pay no later than April 15th. I can set up a reminder date that I'm thinking, okay, if they mail it no later than the 15th, I should have it by the 18th. And what you can do is you can run reports based on these reminder dates to help you keep up with who has promised you a payment, who hasn't, when follow-up needs to happen. So it saves you from writing all of those individual notes. So I put in a reminder date for myself, and I'm going to show you how I can run a report on this. But I want to show you something else that's very important. Remember when we looked at the cycle codes for customer statements, and there wasn't a lookup box. It's user-defined, and I might call it M for monthly, and you may call it 1. The memo codes are basically the same way. So you should have consistency with what you name the memo code on each customer. Hopefully that makes sense. Meaning that if I decide to use the term collect, then every customer in my system that I add a memo to with collection notes, I call the memo code collect. Because when I go to generate my report, I will want to pull it based on the memo code. And I'll show you in a minute how that could be, what would happen if you don't have consistent codes. So hopefully that would make sense. So if I went to another customer and let's go down here, and I have to make a collection call to them, I can set up a new memo code. If I do a lookup, it's only going to show me codes that already exist for that customer. So that lookup doesn't do you any good. So I'm going to type collect. Again, I want it to be consistent. The description doesn't have to be consistent, but the memo code does. Again, I can type in notes. And you can put as much detail as you want in here. An example would be Oasis. We use this method to track our collections if we ever have to call someone regarding a past due. And in our notes, we actually list what invoices we're calling about, so that we know that on this date, we called about invoice 123 and 156. You know, maybe they pay 123, but they didn't pay 156. When I call them, you know, in a couple of weeks, then I would reference that I'm calling about 156. So I'm going to go ahead and put the same reminder date that I had on the last one. Again, but again, it can be any reminder date you want. And as you're updating these notes, excuse me, as you're updating these notes, you can change the reminder date, or if this client gets their account caught up to date and you aren't making any more collection calls, you would just remove that reminder date. So I'm going to go ahead and just accept this one. And then what I'm going to show you is in Accounts Receivable, under Reports, there is a report called Customer Memo Printing. And I could do it just for a range of customers, for various things, but I'm going to run it by memo code. And I'm going to say do a memo code equal to, and now when I do a lookup, it's going to show me any memo code that exists in my entire customer database. So when I do a lookup, I see that I have one called collect. I also see one called collection. So you'll notice those two are different, and you would want those descriptions to be the same if you're wanting to pull one report equal to collect. So with this, I would do memo code called collect. I would say that has a reminder date, and I'm going to do a range. Let's say that I want to see everybody that has a reminder date from today through the end of April. And I'm going to preview this report. And if it doesn't give you what you want, then you can go back and change your parameters, because you may realize that you've made an incorrect selection. But it's going to print a report for you for anyone that has a memo code equal to collect and has a reminder date of the parameter I did of today's date through April 30th. So then you can pull this report and see who promised you payment, and then you can cross-reference the client to what's past due. So this is just an example of one way that you can use memo codes to help with various things in Sage. Again, I just like to use the example of using it for collections, because I think that's just a good example, and it's a whole lot easier than how I've seen it managed before. So just want to let you know that. If you need help with setting up memos, if you want to learn more about anywhere that memos can be set up within Sage, various ways that they can be used, please feel free to reach out to our Sage team, and someone will be glad to work with you. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is doing debit memos or credit memos against existing invoices. And let's say that you accidentally overcharge a customer and you need to issue them a credit against an invoice. Instead of doing a brand new invoice with a negative total on it, you can do a credit memo within Sage, and it will automatically apply that credit memo to the original invoice. So it gives you a much better audit trail than if you just do a brand new invoice number as a negative amount that doesn't tie back into the original. So how you do a credit memo is you go into invoice data entry. Now we're talking about AR. You can also do credit memos and debit memos through sales order if that's how you do your invoicing. So today our example is assuming that you're doing your invoices in AR, and that's how we're going to do the credit memo. So you're going to go into invoice data entry. If you do batch entry, obviously just give it a batch number. And instead of issuing the next invoice number, you're going to type in CM for credit memo, and then I'm going to assign it a number. If I do it this way, Sage automatically assumes I am doing a credit memo. So you'll see how it issued the next number and then put a CM behind it instead of an IN behind it. So you're going to pick your customer, and let's just grab this customer. And now it wants to know what invoice you're applying this credit memo to. And I'm going to do a credit memo against invoice number 48, which I do not see there. Oh, sorry, I was looking at something else. So let's say that that this credit, this invoice should have really been for $100, and for whatever reason I overcharged them. I'm going to select the invoice, and I'm going to go to my lines tab, and normally it's going to pull up what was on the original invoice. I'm not sure why that one didn't. Let me pick it, see if I can pick a better example. Nope. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and type something in real quick, miscellaneous, and it wants to know the quantity and the price. If I am doing a credit memo, if the invoice, let's just look this up real quick. Actually, let me just do this one. So the invoice is $149.13. It should have been for $100. So I'm going to do a credit of $49.13. So I'm going to go to my lines, whoops. And now it doesn't want to play, so let's cancel this. Yes. So let's go back to credit memo. And let me just grab another one that might work a little bit better in this example. And we will do this one. And we'll say that this should have just been $30. So we need to do a credit memo of $8.20. That, go to lines, there we go. So what you're going to do with that credit memo is you're going to put in the quantity, and you do not want to put it in as a negative because you've already told Sage that this is going to be a credit memo, okay? If you put it in as a negative, it's then going to turn into a positive. So the amount that I want to credit off is $8.20, okay? Now, if you're doing this in sales order, it's going to have an impact on your inventory and so forth, but we're going to go ahead and accept this. Sure, I do one more thing here, ABF, okay. So we're going to accept it. Yes to save changes. And here is that credit memo. I'm going to tell it I want to print this. I'm just going to do a quick preview. And it shows again that this is a credit memo. Forgive my ugly invoice form here. I'm going to say no to the sales journal. And I guess we need to go ahead and do that. Sorry. Back here, proceed. Use a future date because of my demo data. Okay, so there's my sales journal. I'm going to update this. No, I don't need a gross profit journal. Yes, I want to update. And I'm not going to do the daily transaction register just to save time. But if I go to that customer and I go to the invoice tab and I find that invoice, here we go, I'm sorry. You find that invoice, you're going to see that with your transaction history, you see the invoice and you see the credit memo because you truly told the system that it was a credit and you applied it to the invoice. If you did it just as a brand new invoice as a negative amount, this invoice is still going to show due for $38.20. And then down here, you're going to have a new invoice number with a negative amount. So then when you're doing a cash receipt, you're going to have to remember to apply all of those so that it doesn't look like one still has a balance remaining. And this is just a really good way to keep that audit trail. So hopefully that makes sense. So the key thing to remember is that if you tell it it's a credit memo, Sage automatically knows that it is going to be a negative. If you tell it it's a debit memo, Sage is automatically going to know that it's a positive and you're adding to the invoice balance. So keep that in mind that you don't want to put in a negative number on a credit memo because then it's going to be a negative plus a negative and then equal a positive. So I did want to show you that feature, and I apologize for stammering a little bit with that one, but hopefully this is something that will help you in the future. And the final thing that we are going to talk about is how to write off a bad debt. So what I see some people do is they'll do a credit memo and they just will adjust off that entire balance, which is fine. But if you're wanting to track your bad debts and how much you've written off, and to be able to tell when you're looking at a customer that something was a bad debt, the proper way to do a write-off is through cash receipts. So we're going to go through and I'm going to show you how to write off a bad debt. And the bad debt can be the entire invoice, which is the example I'm going to do today, but it also could be just a portion of the invoice. You know, maybe the client has a dispute, they weren't happy with the service, and you're like, well, you know, they've only paid X number of dollars, they're not going to pay the rest. So you can pay off just a portion of that. So what you're going to do to write off a bad debt is you're going to go into cash receipt entry, and I'm just going to give a generic batch number here. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to give it a deposit number, and I'm going to make sure that it's defaulting to the right bank code, even though there's $0 going to hit the bank. I'm going to give it a deposit date, and I'll just let it do the demo company date. When it wants to know the amount of the deposit, it's going to be 0. So I'm going to just click accept. And then I'm going to pull up a customer, and my example today is RNS Corp. And it defaults to the original type of cash, which is fine. I can put in the invoice number here if I want to, or I can do it at the Lines tab. And then it wants to know the check number. What I put in the check number is bad debt, or I could put in write-off, whatever description you like to use. But that's what I'm going to use for the check number. For the amount received, I'm going to leave it at $0. Then I'm going to go to my Lines tab. And the reason I'm not putting an invoice here is maybe I'm writing off multiple invoices. Maybe this customer unfortunately went out of business during the pandemic and I'm having to write off multiple invoices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the invoice that I'm writing off, which I'm going to be writing off invoice 119, and I'm writing off the entire invoice. So this $4,300. So I'm going to select it. And you notice the amount posted says 0 because that is pulling from what the deposit amount is. So you need to make sure you fill in this amount posted, and it's going to be the full amount of the invoice. And then my next line entry is I need to offset this, and I'm going to offset it to my general ledger. So I'm going to go down, and where it says line type invoice, I'm going to change this to say GL account number. And then I'm going to select my GL account number for my bad debt. And I believe it's 251. So I'm going to select this account number, and then it's going to put in the amount that is going to offset and hit this GL. So nothing is hitting my cash, but it's going to come out of accounts receivable and it's going to hit the AR account. So I'm going to click accept, and let's just go ahead and there we go. This was my deposit. I'm going to preview it. So here's the details of that write-off. You can see the check number says bad debt. So I'm going to exit out of here. There's my division recap. So you can see that it is crediting my accounts receivable account, and it's debiting my bad debt account. I'm going to exit out of here. Do I want to update it? I'm going to say yes. To save time, I'm not going to update the daily transaction register, but that is something you always want to do because the cash receipt journal hits my AR module, but this daily transaction register is where the posting actually hits the GL. So I'm going to go into my customer. I'm going to go and pull them up. I'm going to go to invoices, and I'm going to find my invoice 119. So you'll see now that my invoice is listed there and my balance is 0. If I click on it to see the history, I can see that this check is called the bad debt. So I can easily see, you know, these folks did not pay this with a check number, but I actually wrote off a bad debt. So that is the proper way within Sage 100 to write off a bad debt. And again, if I was just writing off a portion of it, then I could do that as well, and then it would have left a balance on this invoice. So I did want to take you through that because I get a lot of calls that will ask, you know, how do I write off a bad debt? I'm not sure how to do that. So that is another way that you can, it's the proper way to do it, so you actually have kind of an audit trail of what has been written off. So, and then you could, if you wanted to add a collection note to them or a note that says, hey, you know, this company has gone out of business and, you know, we've had to write off their entire account, you can, you know, add whatever notes that you want to. So if you need assistance in writing off a bad debt, figuring out what to do to kind of clean up some things, maybe you've never written them off properly and you've just issued credits, but now you've got credits, negative invoices sitting out there, and positive invoices, we can walk you through how to apply those two together so that they come off of the customer's account, and so that it's not showing anything out there. So there's various ways that we can help you get all of that straightened out. So again, I would like to thank you for joining me today. I apologize for the audio issue earlier in the presentation. And just to reiterate, if you would like any information on sales tax reporting and the other options available, please contact Ms. Jody Patterson at jody@oasisky.com. If you have any questions about needing assistance with what we've talked about, if you realize that you need to get in touch with us to talk about an upgrade, anything of that nature, please reach out to Ms. Garen Stout, and her email address is gstout, S-T-O-U-T, @oasisky.com. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and I hope you found this presentation helpful. So thank you.
All right, just again, want to reiterate, thanking you guys for attending the webinar. Also want to just point out there will be a survey that will be sent out. If you need CPE credit, please respond to the survey, and that will get you in the queue for us to send you the CPE certification. Also, if you are interested in any of our upcoming webinars, we do have all of our webinars posted on our website. So if you go to oasisky.com, it has all of the webinars that we have scheduled through the end of the year. Just so if you guys want to go ahead and get registered for those, get those on your calendar. If you're not able to attend, if you do register, we'll send you the recording afterwards. So thanks a lot and have a great day.